Hey guys, good morning. The topic came up on the group about too much protein turning to sugar and knocking you out of ketosis if you're on a ketogenic diet. Gluconeogenesis is the process they're talking about, automatically converting protein to sugar. But to understand the process first, you have to understand what has to happen inside the body. When you ingest protein, when you start to digest it, it gets broken down into different amino acid forms and then processed in the body. Now, the old way of thinking it is you eat too much protein and you're going to get a glucose spike. Well, the other night I consumed 2.5 pounds of meat in 20 minutes. Forced it as much as I could. I tracked over a 6-hour period and no glucose spike at all. I went from 89, well, I mean a little bit, but it's very minute, nothing to be worried about. I went from 89 to 92, and then I went to 103, and then right back down. Came down almost immediately. So I can honestly say I'm not hypersensitive to protein. I can't say that everybody's not hypersensitive to protein. I've seen people say that if they eat too much protein that they're knocked out of ketosis. I think there are some underlying factors there. The thing that aggravates me the most, especially on these keto groups and such, is you have some know-it-all pop up and they'll say, oh yeah, if you eat too much protein, you're going to be knocked out of ketosis. It's not the case. The majority of us can eat as much protein as we possibly want, and we're never going to get kicked out of ketosis. Then there are some of us that are hypersensitive to it and can. But those few, I feel bad for them. But that does not mean that the main cause is too much protein. There could be some underlying factors there that we're not taking into account. For years we've had these studies that say too much protein turns to sugar, but now they're starting to find that that's not actually the case. When they actually look at the glucose increase rate based on the amount of protein that you intake on a carbohydrate-based diet or a ketogenic diet, there's almost no increase at all. They have minimal effect on the amount of glucose that's created in the body. In the description box, I'm going to link a study or just an article that was written that talked about carbohydrate-based diets and the ketogenic-based diets, and there being minimal to no increase at all in glucose spiking because of too much protein. And there is no evidence that actually states that gluconeogenesis is a thing that you should worry about because of too much protein. There's no conclusive facts at all. There are no studies that prove this. And, just individually trying to engage yourself, trying to figure out what works for you is what's key. And I think that's where we're at in these journeys, is we're starting to realize you can't just be set on, my information or Joe Schmo's information or something like that. And when you have somebody that pops up in your life and they're like, oh yeah, this is like it is, immediately discredit. I won't listen to something like that. When somebody is 100% sure of what they're talking about, like me, I'm giving you guys options. There are situations that protein would knock somebody out of ketosis, but I believe there are underlying factors there. It's not the fact that it's too much protein. It could be a certain amino acid chain. It could be just a few different things. How their body responds well to a leaner cut of meat versus a fattier cut of meat. How fat can control the spiking and digestion based on how you're ingesting it. Leaner proteins do induce a higher insulin spike. So it's just a matter of trying to figure out what works for you and not fear-mongering protein and being dogmatic in your ways. Too much protein does not cause a glucose spike for me. I absolutely can eat as much protein as I want, I'm convinced, and I won't have a spike in glucose at all. I've been trying this for months now, and nothing at all. So I'm one of those people that if I have this too much protein number, I never induce insulin. What ends up happening is gluconeogenesis is demand driven. Once the sugar levels in your blood drop so low that your organs don't have enough glucose to live off of, because your organs run off of sugar, and your brain and your liver kind of control and moderate the function of the amount of glucose that's produced, so your organs can actually function, and it keeps it at the optimal level all the time via the process called gluconeogenesis. That's why I think the natural state of living is actually in a ketotic state, because your body can naturally control its own level of glucose while you're using ketones as fuel in the skeletal muscle in the brain. So last night I did a video talking about the different types of transporters and stuff and what happens inside the body. We know that the liver uses an SLC16A6 or SLC1686 transporter to transport ketones from your liver into the blood, and the blood doesn't necessarily need a transporter. It's like mixing sugar with water. It mixes very well, or salt with water for that matter, and then it's transported through the bloodstream. And how the brain uses it, it has a moxycarboxide or an MCT style transporter, and there's other names for it that take the ketone and transport it through the blood-brain barrier, and then the brain can either use an NADA plus or an NADH up regulation or down regulation, and then in there it can be turned back into acetoacetate, or it can stay as its beta hydroxybutyrate form and continue to be a fuel source. The brain, I believe, is one of the only things that can actually choose whether or not it wants to use glucose or a ketone fuel. It's the only thing in the body that can choose either or. So there's transport thing going on, and our dominant ketone is acetoacetate, and our primary ketone is acetoacetate. The dominant ketone is beta hydroxybutyrate, and the conversion all happens from acetoacetate. And once we start understanding this conversion, this regulation process, the transporter process, that too much protein in most cases does not turn into sugar, and that's typically just in hypersensitive people or somebody that has underlying issues, this is when we can become more successful at this point. I'm starting to get to the point now where just having the conversations over and over again with people about gluconeogenesis and what they believe and how they like to force it on other people or say this is how it is, it gets ridiculous. And just understand there's no reason to fearmonger protein. There's no reason to tell people that because you eat too much protein you're going to be kicked out of a ketotic state. These are just very negative, uninformative responses to people. And when we start talking about vitamin C levels and mineral and vitamin uptake, people have to understand with the reduction of sugar in the diet, there's no compete for transporters. And when you look at the difference between the two different types of vitamin C, SVCT transporters can take one type of vitamin C perfectly fine with no compete at all with glucose. Then you have the glut transporters that try to take up glucose that do compete, or the glut transporters try to take up glucose and vitamin C, the other side of the chain, or the other type of vitamin C. And when you have a compete between glucose and the other type of vitamin C, now you're looking at the dominant available, like a fuel source, versus a vitamin being taken up. Glucose is going to be dominant in that situation, and it's going to uptake that type of vitamin C first. So what ends up happening with that is you're in constant competition, so your need for vitamin C requirement goes up. But once you reduce the amount of glucose in the system, then the need for high levels of vitamin C goes down, and you can almost live off trace levels of vitamin C that are in meat products or animal-based products. Anyway, there's a whole science behind this, and once we start realizing, the science behind it doesn't necessarily... people don't necessarily represent the science that's being shown, because they're used to using science from a standard American diet, or a diet that's higher in sugar and carbohydrates, which completely changes how they affect people with a low to no sugar carbohydrate diet. And just realizing that and utilizing that information in your journey, and just telling people you may not understand exactly the way you think you do, that protein shouldn't be fear-mongered, and too much protein doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be kicked out of ketotic state, and it's not necessarily an actual proven thing. And there are many of us that have proved that it doesn't affect us, like me for that. I could sit down and eat 3 pounds of meat right now and never have a glucose spike off of it 10, 12 points, and then right back down within an hour or two. So it's just a matter of figuring out what worked for you and knowing that gluconeogenesis is not something to be held or used against somebody that's having a lot of protein. Anyhow, thank you for your time. Have a blessed day.